I decided to take a long road trip alone late one summer because I felt tired of my regular life and I wanted to clear my head. I thought that driving for many hours on empty highways would give me time to think about my problems and about what I wanted to do next with my life. I packed basic things in the trunk of my car like a spare tire, a small toolkit, a first aid box, a blanket, extra water bottles, some snacks, a flashlight, and a small power bank. I checked the fuel tank before leaving and made sure the tires had enough air. The sky was pale blue when I left my home, and the weather felt warm and dry, the kind of weather that makes the road look endless and calm. The trip started normally, with long straight roads and small towns passing by on both sides. I saw empty fields, old gas stations, broken fences, and quiet houses far from one another. There were long stretches of highway with hardly any cars, and I felt alone but also peaceful in that silence. The road had cracks in many places, and sometimes I could feel the car shake slightly when the tires rolled over rough patches. I kept watching the road markings, the faded white lines, and the dark asphalt stretching forward like a ribbon that never ended. As the hours passed, the sky slowly changed, and clouds began to spread across it. The sunlight turned weaker and dimmer, and the air felt heavier. I kept driving because I wanted to cover as much distance as possible before night. I noticed that the road signs became less frequent, and some of them looked old and rusty, with paint peeling off and numbers that were hard to read. There were long sections of highway where there were no houses, no stores, and no buildings, only dry land and patches of bushes on both sides. After many hours, evening arrived, and the sky turned orange, then dark red, and finally deep blue. I turned on my headlights and watched the road disappear into darkness ahead. The world outside my car looked empty. The sides of the road were swallowed by shadows, and I could only see what my headlights touched. The lines on the road looked faint, and the air felt quiet in a strange way, like the world had gone still. I kept driving, telling myself that I would stop when I found a safe rest area or a motel. But there were no motels, no rest areas, no gas stations. Only more highway, more darkness, more silence. My fuel gauge dropped slowly, and I began to feel a small sense of worry in my chest. I thought that if I did not find a place soon, I might run out of fuel on a lonely road in the middle of nowhere. The night grew thicker, and the darkness felt heavier than before. The sky had no moon, and the stars were faint. My headlights cut through the darkness like two narrow beams, and I kept my eyes fixed on the road. Every second felt longer. My body felt tired. My legs felt stiff, my back ached, and my hands felt tense on the steering wheel. Then I noticed something strange. There were tire marks on the road ahead that looked fresh, as if another car had driven there not long ago. The marks swerved slightly to the side, then straightened again. I followed them for a long distance, thinking that maybe there was a car ahead and maybe I would catch up and feel less alone. But I never saw any tail lights. The tire marks continued, then disappeared, then appeared again, and every time I saw them, I felt as if I was following someone who was just far enough to stay out of sight. The longer I drove, the more uneasy I felt. The road felt like it was stretching forever, with no turns, no buildings, no other vehicles. The darkness began to feel like a thick blanket pressing against the windows of my car. The silence felt unnatural, so deep that even the sound of my engine felt loud and sharp, like it did not belong there. The highway passed through a long open area where there were broken fences on both sides, and beyond them, empty land with dry grass and scattered rocks. There were no trees, no lights, no signs of human life. I saw a small dirt road branching off to the right, but it looked abandoned and rough, and I did not want to risk going there. I stayed on the main road and kept moving. After some time, I noticed that the road surface was becoming rougher. The cracks were wider, the color of the asphalt looked darker and older, and the paint on the road lines was almost gone. My car bumped and vibrated more than before. I slowed down because I did not want to damage the tires. The headlights revealed broken patches in the road, and small pieces of asphalt scattered on the surface like black stones. I checked my fuel gauge again and felt stress rise inside me. The needle was getting close to low. I told myself in my mind that I needed to find fuel soon or I would be stuck there in the dark. I imagined what it would feel like to sit alone in a dead car on that empty highway with no sound and no help. and the thought made my chest feel tight. Eventually, I saw something in the distance, a faint shape on the side of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was an old roadside pull-off area with a small dirt lot and what looked like the remains of a structure, maybe an old rest shack or storage shed. The building was broken, with parts of the walls missing, and the roof looked like it had caved in long ago. The place looked abandoned and forgotten. I stopped the car near the dirt lot because I needed to rest for a moment and think. I turned off the engine to save fuel. The silence that followed felt heavy and uncomfortable. The air inside the car felt still, and I could hear my own breathing and the beating of my heart. Outside, the night felt endless. The darkness around the car felt thick, like it was pressing close against the windows. I sat there for a while, trying to stay calm. My body felt tense and tired at the same time. The steering wheel felt rough under my fingers, and the seat felt worn under my back. I looked at the broken building in front of me. It was only a dark shape in the headlights, with jagged edges and shadows inside the empty windows. The dirt lot was uneven, with patches of dry grass sticking out from the ground. I thought about stepping out to stretch my legs, but something inside me refused. The idea of standing outside in that dark open area made me feel exposed and unsafe, like I would be too visible and too alone at the same time. I stayed inside, locked the doors, and tried to breathe slowly. After a few minutes, I heard a faint sound somewhere in the distance, like something scraping lightly across the ground. It was hard to tell where it came from because the night swallowed sound. It did not sound like an animal running. It sounded slow, irregular, and soft. I sat completely still and listened. The sound faded, then returned, then faded again. My skin felt cold even though the air was warm. I turned my headlights off for a moment to avoid attracting attention to my car. When the lights went off, the darkness inside and outside became complete. I could not see anything at all, only black space. I turned them back on again because the darkness felt unbearable. The broken building reappeared in the beam of light, still and silent. I decided to start the car again and continue driving, even with low fuel, because staying there felt worse than risking the road. The engine started with a dull vibration. I slowly rolled back onto the highway and continued forward into the night. The road ahead looked even emptier than before. The darkness on both sides felt deeper, and the air felt still, as if the world had no movement except my car. My eyes grew tired, but I forced myself to stay alert. My hands were stiff on the steering wheel, and my shoulders felt tight. After some time, I saw another shape far ahead on the road. It looked like something large and still, lying partly on the shoulder and partly on the pavement. As I approached slowly, I saw that it was an old car, dark-colored, with dust covering its windows and body. It looked like it had been there for a long time. The tires were flat, and the metal around the wheel wells was rusted. The front bumper was dented, and the headlights were dull and broken. I passed it slowly, and I felt a strange chill run through my body. The car looked like a dead object abandoned in the middle of nowhere, as if whoever owned it had left and never returned. Seeing it there made me realize how easy it was for a person to vanish on roads like this without anyone knowing. As I drove farther, the feeling of unease grew stronger. The road seemed to repeat itself, with the same cracks, the same faded lines, the same dark, empty land on both sides. It felt like I was trapped in a long, endless stretch with no progress, no change, no signs of life. Even the air inside the car smelled stale and old, a mix of dust, fabric, and faint gasoline. My mind began to imagine everything that could go wrong. Tire could burst, the engine could fail, the fuel could run out, I could lose control on a rough patch. I could be stranded alone in complete darkness with no signal, no sound, no help. The thought of that situation made my hands shake slightly. I checked my phone. There was no signal, no bars, only a blank icon at the top of the screen. The device felt useless in my hand. I placed it back beside me and focused on the road. The night felt endless. Time moved slowly, like it was stretching out just to make me feel trapped. I watched the shadows shift slightly as my headlights moved, and every small object on the roadside looked like something more threatening for a brief second before I passed it and saw it was only a rock or a bush. My body felt tense and tired at the same time, a strange mix of exhaustion and fear. My eyes burned slightly, and my neck felt stiff. The sound of the engine was constant, a dull humming that filled the car. The road continued and continued, and I felt like I was driving through a place that had been forgotten by the world. Then something changed. The road started to rise slightly uphill, and the terrain on both sides became uneven, with slopes and shallow ditches. I felt the car work harder as it climbed. After a while, I noticed faint lights far ahead, tiny distant dots that looked like they might belong to a small building or structure. A small sense of relief touched me, but it was mixed with fear because I did not know what kind of place it was. As I got closer, I saw that the lights came from an old roadside gas station. The building looked worn and faded, with paint peeling from the walls and a cracked sign hanging above the pumps. The lights were weak and flickering, like they were struggling to stay on. The area around the station was empty, with no other buildings nearby. The gas pumps looked old, with chipped paint and metal parts that looked rusted. The ground around them was stained with dark patches, probably from spilled fuel over many years. There was a small parking area beside the station with faded lines on the ground and weeds growing through the cracks in the concrete. Even though the place looked abandoned and unsettling, I knew I needed fuel. I pulled up beside one of the pumps and parked. The building looked dark inside, and the windows were dusty and covered with streaks. I could not see anyone inside, and there was no movement anywhere around. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the car for the first time since nightfall. The air outside felt cold and still. The ground felt rough under my shoes. The smell of old fuel, dust, and dry air mixed together. The silence was deep, interrupted only by faint wind moving across the dry ground. I looked around carefully, trying to make sure I was alone. The land around the gas station was flat and open, and in the distance there was nothing but darkness and faint shapes of hills. The weak lights above the pumps buzzed softly, and one of them flickered on and off. I tried using the pump, but it did not respond. The handle felt stiff, and the screen was dead. It looked like it had not worked for a long time. I walked slowly around the pump area, feeling exposed in the open space. The building door was closed, and the handle looked rusty. The idea of entering the building made me feel uneasy, like I might see something inside that I did not want to see. I returned to my car and checked the fuel gauge again. The needle was very low now. I realized I could not stay here long. I got back inside and locked the doors. I felt trapped between two bad choices: stay in this creepy, deserted gas station with almost no fuel, or continue into the dark, unknown highway and risk running out completely. I chose to continue driving. The engine felt weaker as I pulled away, and the fuel gauge almost touched empty. I drove slowly to save fuel. The darkness felt even heavier now that I had stepped out and felt how empty the world around me really was. The road stretched onward, and I kept moving forward because I had no other choice. The fear inside me kept growing, not from anything supernatural, but from the pure isolation, the silence, the distance from help, and the realization that I was just a small person in a huge empty place where anything could go wrong and no one would know. The road curved slightly after some time, and I drove along a stretch where one side dropped into a shallow valley with dry grass and rocks. The other side rose into a low embankment with more cracked earth and scattered stones. The headlights shined across the uneven ground, and shadows stretched and moved in strange shapes as the car rolled forward. Then the warning light for fuel came on. A small yellow symbol on the dashboard glowed softly, and I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest. I knew that meant I had very little fuel left. Every mile from that point felt like a gamble. The engine sound changed slightly, and I became more aware of every movement, every vibration, every tiny mechanical sound inside the car. My breathing grew shallow. My hands felt sweaty on the steering wheel. My body felt tense from head to toe. The darkness outside looked heavier, and the silence sounded louder. I kept driving slowly, trying to stretch every drop of fuel. The road ahead felt endless. I felt like the car was carrying not only my body, but also my fear, my exhaustion, and my uncertainty. Finally, after what felt like a very long time, I saw faint lights far ahead again. They looked small, weak, and far away, but they were there. I kept driving toward them with hope and fear mixed together, because I did not know what kind of place it was, but I knew I needed it. The lights grew closer and clearer, and I saw that they came from a small settlement or cluster of buildings near the road. There were a few houses, a small structure that looked like a service shop, and a single building with a sign that looked like it might be a small motel or rest lodge. The area was quiet, but it did not look abandoned like the gas station. I felt a wave of relief flow through me, but the fear and tension still stayed inside my body, like a shadow that would not leave. I pulled off the road and parked near the side of the settlement. I turned off the engine, and the silence returned, but now it felt different, less empty and less hopeless. I remained inside the car for a while, letting my body calm down and letting my mind process everything that had happened on that long, dark road. The ending of my journey was not dramatic or loud. It was simple and heavy. I realized how close I had come to being stranded alone in the dark, with no fuel, no signal, and no help. I understood how fragile a road trip could become when distance, darkness, and isolation surrounded a person. I felt grateful that I had reached a place where I could rest, but I also felt shaken by the experience. Sitting there, I understood clearly that the fear I felt did not come from monsters or ghosts. It came from real things. Loneliness, darkness, empty roads, failing resources, and the quiet, cold truth that sometimes the world can feel huge and empty, and a single mistake or bit of bad luck can leave a person lost and helpless. That night taught me more about myself than I expected. It showed me how small I was compared to the world around me, and how easily safety could turn into danger when the road keeps going, the fuel runs low, and there is nothing but dark land on every side. I did not forget that feeling. It stayed with me long after the trip ended, as a clear, heavy memory that reminded me of that long, silent stretch of highway and the fear that moved quietly inside it. I had always liked the idea of long drives. There was something about the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching ahead, the hum of tires on pavement, and the slow march of landscapes changing through the windshield that calmed me in a way that nothing else could. I had been planning this trip for months, a solo road trip across the northern states, taking back roads, small highways, and unmarked paths to see the country in a way that maps rarely promised. I wanted freedom, I wanted solitude, and I wanted the kind of clarity that only comes from hours alone in a car, moving steadily forward. I never expected that clarity would come with the weight of fear pressing down on me like a storm cloud. I left at dawn, the sky still pale with early light, the air crisp and biting against my face through the cracked window. My car was packed lightly, just enough for a week on the road with a tent, sleeping bag, and basic supplies in the back. The first few hours were perfect. The morning sun glinted off frost on the fields I drove past, and the air smelled clean, with a hint of pine and wet soil. I listened to music quietly, only letting it fill the space occasionally, because I wanted to hear the sound of the world outside. By mid-morning, I was already on a smaller road, one that curved through dense woods and ran alongside a river that glimmered silver in the sun. The drive was hypnotic, and I found myself relaxing more than I had in months. I stopped for coffee at a small diner tucked into a bend of the road. It was the kind of place with chipped paint and flickering neon, the smell of old grease mixing with strong coffee. I stayed longer than I intended, lingering over the warm steam rising from my cup, watching the road outside through the dusty windows. I noted the way the light shifted over the trees, how the branches trembled in the slight wind. Everything was ordinary, but already I could feel the pull of isolation beginning to creep in. I got back on the road, driving deeper into the forested stretch I had seen on the map. The road narrowed, the asphalt cracking with age, and I passed fewer and fewer cars. When I reached a particularly dense section, I noticed how the air changed. It felt cooler, damper, almost heavy. I glanced at my gas gauge. I had a little over half a tank, enough for now, but I made a mental note to watch it. I hadn't seen a station for miles. The trouble began mid-afternoon. I had been driving for what felt like hours, and the road had become a twisting, uneven path with tall trees closing in on either side. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the road, making the forest seem denser and more impenetrable. I was moving cautiously, knowing that any wrong turn could mean trouble. That's when I saw the first sign of something wrong. A car was parked at the side of the road, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. It was old, rusted, and looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. I slowed down instinctively, my eyes scanning the windows for any movement. There was none. For a moment, I debated whether I should stop or keep going. Something about the way it sat there, tilted slightly with weeds growing up around the tires, made me uneasy. I kept driving. Minutes later, the road seemed to get worse. Potholes broke up the asphalt, branches scraped the sides of the car, and the road bent into an area that appeared almost forgotten. I had been on this stretch long enough to notice that the GPS signal had disappeared. My phone had no service. I tried not to let it worry me. I told myself that if I kept moving forward, I would eventually reach a main road. But the further I drove, the more isolated it felt. Every mile stretched the silence. Even the sound of the car seemed too loud in the stillness. That's when I saw movement on the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I approached, I realized it was a person, a man, walking slowly in the middle of the road. He wore dark, dirty clothes, and his hair was long and unkempt. There was no shoulder to the road, no place to safely pull over. He didn't move to the side. He just walked, staring straight ahead, and the road was narrow. I slowed the car to a crawl, heart pounding, and passed him with barely an inch to spare. After that, I kept expecting the road to open up again. Didn't. The sky darkened faster than it should have, shadows pressing against the edges of the road like walls. I started seeing more abandoned cars, signs of life long gone. A bicycle rusted into the grass, a crumpled backpack, a pair of shoes without a body nearby. Every few minutes, the trees seemed to close in more, and I caught glimpses of strange shapes moving in the corner of my vision. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the road, on keeping the car on the uneven asphalt. Then the sound came. At first, it was faint, a scraping like metal against metal. I thought it might be a branch, but the sound persisted, growing closer. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. There was a car behind me, keeping pace exactly, though I hadn't seen it before. The headlights were dim, and the driver was impossible to see. I accelerated slightly, but it followed. I tried braking, swerving slightly, even stopping completely, and the car stopped too. Panic started to set in. I was trapped on a narrow road in the middle of a forest. No cell service, and someone or something was following me. My heart hammered in my chest. I tried to think rationally, remembering that I had a tent and could camp if I had to. But the idea of staying here, surrounded by shadows with someone else watching, was unbearable. I decided I had to get to a main road, no matter what. The forest seemed endless. Every bend was the same, every shadow deeper, every sound amplified. I began noticing signs, branches broken in unnatural ways, footprints in the dirt on the shoulder of the road. Whoever or whatever was following me was trying to send a message, or at least make their presence known. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to ignore the fear rising in my stomach. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell if it was actually hours or just moments. The sky was completely dark now, the moon barely visible through thick clouds. My headlights caught movement more than once, and each time I caught my breath, prepared to confront some danger. Every turn I took seemed to loop back into the same section of road. I began to wonder if I was lost in a way that maps couldn't explain. Finally, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, like streetlights, though flickering and weak. I pushed the car harder, trying to ignore the scraping sound behind me that had returned. As I approached, the road widened slightly, and I realized I was nearing a small town, the kind that seems like it exists only on maps. There were houses, dim lights, and the comforting sight of power lines along the road. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I kept driving until I saw a gas station. It was small, old, and nearly empty, but it was open. I parked, trembling, and filled the tank, checking over my shoulder constantly. No one followed me into the station, and the lights made me feel safe for the first time in hours. I grabbed a bottle of water, some snacks, and a map from inside, just to confirm my route. I realized then that I had driven through a stretch of road that had been unmarked for decades, likely bypassed in favor of newer highways, and I had stumbled into an area that was essentially abandoned. The man, the cars, the scattered belongings. It was all evidence of a place forgotten and dangerous. I had survived by driving steadily and keeping calm, but the fear stayed with me, a weight in my chest that wouldn't lift until I left that area completely. I decided not to risk the back roads again. I plotted a new route on the map, sticking to main highways, well-traveled roads, and areas that were easy to navigate. The drive back was slow, cautious, but uneventful. I passed through small towns, stopped at diners for food, and even pulled over to sleep in my car in a well-lit parking lot, refusing to push through exhaustion in areas I didn't trust. By the time I reached the outskirts of a larger city, the fear had lessened, replaced by a deep exhaustion and relief. I parked at a motel, checked in, and for the first time in the trip, allowed myself to relax completely. I showered, changed into clean clothes, and sat on the bed, staring out the window at the city lights, thinking about what had happened. I realized how easily I had underestimated the dangers of isolation, how quickly a familiar activity could turn frightening. The next morning, I drove home along familiar highways. I kept the radio on, and every so often I glanced at the map, making sure I stayed on the main route. By the time I reached my city, the memory of the backroad terror had faded slightly, replaced with the relief of survival. I knew I would never forget that stretch of road, the abandoned cars, the man walking in the dark, the way the trees seemed to close in. But I also knew I had learned something important, that careful planning, caution, and calm could get me through even the most frightening situations. Looking back, the trip wasn't ruined. It was a lesson. I still loved road trips, still loved the freedom they offered, but I knew now that solitude and isolation came with real danger, and that awareness would make me a better traveler in the future. The story of that back road would stay with me. A memory of fear survived, and the clear ending was this. I reached safety, I survived, and I had the experience of truly understanding how fragile and precarious life could feel on a long, lonely road. Even months later, I can still remember the smell of wet leaves, the sound of tires scraping over cracked asphalt, and the feeling of a presence in the darkness that was very real. It changed how I travel, how I look at maps, and how I think about risk. But I also remember the relief when the lights of the town appeared, the smell of coffee at the gas station, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had driven through fear and come out the other side intact. That clarity, strange and heavy as it was, became part of me. It reminded me that fear is real, but survival is possible if you stay calm, stay aware, and keep moving forward. I started the road trip because I wanted to clear my head. I had been working too much, sitting in the same room every day, staring at the same walls and screens, feeling like my thoughts were stuck in one place. I wanted to drive far, across empty roads, through long stretches of land where I could think in silence and feel away from everything. I packed my car with basic things like water, snacks, a blanket, a flashlight, a small toolkit, and a spare tire. I checked the fuel, the oil, and the tires. I told myself I would drive until I felt tired and then I would find a safe place to stop. That was my plan. It sounded simple when I started. The first part of the drive felt calm. The road was straight, the weather was clear, and the sky was wide and bright. I watched fields, hills, and small empty towns pass by. The road felt endless, and I liked that. I wanted distance between me and my normal life. As the day went on, the clouds grew thicker and the light slowly faded. The road stretched into darker land with fewer signs, fewer houses, and fewer places that looked familiar. I kept driving because I was already far out and I did not want to turn back. By the time the sun disappeared, the road felt empty in a different way. The darkness seemed heavy, like it sat on the road and pressed against the windows. My headlights reached forward but only showed a thin path of gray asphalt, dry soil, and small bushes on each side. Beyond that, everything was just black. The road felt narrow, even though I knew it was the same width it had always been. The silence in the car started to feel louder than the engine. I checked the fuel gauge and saw it was lower than I wanted. I remembered passing a station earlier, but I had not stopped because I thought another one would appear later. Now the road was empty and I had no idea how long it would be before I saw another one. I kept driving and watched the numbers drop a little more every few minutes. I felt a slow tension build in my chest. It was not fear at first, only unease, like I had made a mistake without noticing when it happened. I saw a sign on the side of the road. It was old, worn, and the letters were faded. It said there was a small town several miles ahead. I felt relief because I thought the town would have fuel, lights, and people. I kept driving toward it, trying to stay calm. The road turned rough. Cracks and patches spread across the surface. There were no lane markings anymore. I felt the car shake slightly under me, and I slowed down because it felt safer. After some time, I reached the town, but it did not look like I expected. There were buildings, but they were dark and empty. Some windows were broken. Some doors were half open. Old signs hung crooked above shops that looked closed for years. The streets were quiet. No streetlights worked. My headlights moved across dusty walls and metal shutters. The air felt still, like nothing had changed in years. I kept driving slowly through the main street, hoping to see a working gas station, but every station I passed was abandoned. Old pumps stood in place, covered in dirt and rust. The small booths were empty and cracked. I felt the weight of the situation sink into me. I was in a dead town, low on fuel, in the middle of the night with nowhere to go. My fuel light turned on. I knew I could not drive much farther. I had to choose between stopping there or getting stranded on the road outside the town with no lights, no shelter, and no idea of how far the next place would be. I chose to stay because at least I had buildings around me, even if they were broken and silent. I found a small open space near an old store. The asphalt was uneven and broken, but it was flat enough to park. I turned off the engine to save fuel. The silence inside the car was thick. I listened to the faint ticking of the cooling engine. I looked around and saw only shadows, dark shapes of buildings, and long empty streets. I locked the doors and sat still for a while, trying to calm myself. I told myself I would rest for a bit and wait for morning. Maybe in daylight I would find a road that led to a real station. As I sat there, I noticed how the town felt wrong in a quiet, slow way. It was not loud or dramatic. It was the kind of wrong that made you feel like you should not be there. The air felt stale, like it had not moved in a long time. The ground was covered with thin layers of dust that looked untouched. There were no animals, no insects, no signs of life at all. Even abandoned places usually had some noise, some small movement, but this place had nothing. Felt frozen. I tried to rest, but I could not sleep. My mind kept drifting to strange thoughts, small details, small fears. I thought about how no one knew exactly where I was at that moment. I thought about how long it would take anyone to find me if something went wrong. I thought about how far the nearest working place might be. Time passed slowly. I stared through the windshield into the darkness and watched faint shapes shift when I blinked. Then I heard something. It was small at first, almost like a light scrape. It did not sound like the wind, because there was no wind. It did not sound like an animal, because it was too steady. It sounded like something brushing against rough ground. The sound came from somewhere near the back of the car. I felt my chest tighten. I stayed very still and listened. The noise happened again. A slow, dragging sound, then silence, then another small movement. I told myself it could be debris moving or metal expanding from temperature change. I tried to think logically, but the sound felt intentional, like something slow and careful. I did not want to move or turn on the engine. I did not want to draw attention to myself. I stayed still and held my breath. The sound stopped for a while, and the silence returned, even heavier than before. I thought maybe my mind had made it seem louder than it was. I tried to relax again. Then I saw something in my side mirror. A faint shape near the edge of the parking area. It was low to the ground, dark, and hard to see. It was not clear enough to recognize. It did not move for several seconds, but I felt that it had not been there earlier. I stared at it and felt a chill run through me, not because I knew what it was, but because I didn't. The shape shifted slightly, almost like it crawled closer. It did not walk upright. It stayed low, close to the ground, moving slowly, like it was careful not to make noise. I felt fear rise inside me in a deep, physical way. My hands felt cold. My breathing grew shallow. I did not want to turn on the lights because I did not know what reaction that might cause, but I also did not want to sit there in darkness while something moved around my car. I forced myself to stay calm and watch every small movement. The shape disappeared from the mirror, and for a few seconds I did not know where it was. My heart pounded. I imagined it near the back of the car again, near the trunk or near the tires. I listened for sound but heard nothing. Then I heard a light tap against the back bumper. It was soft, but it was real. I felt it through the frame of the car. It did not sound like a rock or something falling. It sounded like contact, like something deliberately touching the car. I felt exposed, even though I was inside with the doors locked. The car felt thin. The glass felt fragile. I imagined something crouched behind me, just out of sight, and I hated that I could not see it. I reached slowly for the flashlight I had packed. My hand shook slightly as I picked it up. I waited a moment, then I turned it on and pointed it toward the rear window and side mirror. The beam shook because my hand was shaking. The light cut across the empty lot and the old buildings, but I did not see anything at first. The beam felt weak in the wide darkness. I turned my body and aimed the flashlight toward the back. For a second, I saw something move away into the shadows, fast but low. I only caught part of it, like a pale shape sliding across the ground. It did not look like an animal I recognized. It was thin, almost too thin for a person, but shaped like one. I could not see details, only the motion and the outline. It disappeared behind a broken wall. A cold fear settled deep in my stomach. This was not imagination. Something real was there, moving with intention, hiding when I tried to look. I felt trapped in my own car. I thought about starting the engine and leaving, but I knew my fuel was almost empty. If I drove into the dark road and ran out of fuel in the middle of nowhere, I might end up in an even worse situation, far from any shelter. I turned off the flashlight and sat in darkness again because I felt like the light exposed me more than it helped. I waited and listened. Minutes passed. Then I heard the sound again, but this time it was closer to the front of the car. A slow scrape across the ground, a faint brush against metal. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I imagined it moving around me in circles, studying the car, staying just out of sight. I wondered how long it had been in this town. I wondered how many travelers had stopped here before me. I wondered if that was why the town felt so empty, like something had slowly removed life from it, piece by piece, year after year, until nothing was left except silent buildings and whatever was moving outside my car. Time felt stretched and endless. Every second felt too long. I did not move. I kept my hands still and my breathing quiet. I hoped that if I made no sound, it would lose interest and leave. But the longer I stayed, the more I felt like it knew I was there and was simply waiting for something. Then I noticed something else. On the inside of the windshield, near the bottom edge, I saw a faint smear, like something had brushed against the outside glass earlier. I leaned forward slightly and saw thin marks across the dust on the hood that looked like they were made by fingers or something similar, dragging slowly. The marks were long, uneven, and fresh. I had not seen them when I parked. It meant that whatever was out there had already come close to the front of the car, maybe while I was looking in another direction. I realized I was not just being watched. I was being studied. That thought made the fear feel heavier than anything else that night. I stayed like that for what felt like hours. The sounds would come and go, small movements, faint scrapes, then silence. Sometimes I heard nothing and thought it was gone. Then a new sound would remind me that it was still there. The darkness outside the car felt alive, like it wrapped around me and held me in place. At some point, exhaustion and fear mixed together. My eyes burned from staring too long. My body felt stiff and tense from staying completely still. I did not sleep, but my thoughts drifted in slow, heavy waves. I watched the faint outline of distant buildings until the sky began to change color. Very slowly, a weak gray light started to spread across the sky. The darkness faded little by little. The shapes of the buildings became clearer. The roads and cracked sidewalks appeared again. The world around me formed back into visible reality. As the light grew stronger, the feeling outside the car changed. The silence was still there, but the pressure was gone. The air felt less heavy. The strange sense of presence slowly faded. I waited until the sun fully rose. The town looked empty and dead again, like any other abandoned place, but in daylight it felt less unreal. I opened the door carefully and stepped out. My legs felt weak. The ground was cold and dusty. I walked slowly around the car. When I looked at the hood and the sides, I saw the marks more clearly. Long smears in the dust, thin and uneven, dragged in curved paths. They did not look like scratches from branches or animals. They looked like something long and narrow had slid across the metal with control and direction. On the ground near the back tire, I saw disturbed dust and shallow drag lines, like something had moved low along the ground and stopped there for a while. There were no footprints, at least none that looked normal. Only strange shallow trails that broke off near cracks in the pavement. I followed them a short distance, but they disappeared near a pile of broken bricks and fallen wood where the shadows still looked deep even in sunlight. I felt a strong need to leave. I did not want to explore, I did not want answers, I only wanted distance. I got back into the car, started the engine, and watched the fuel gauge hover just above empty. I drove slowly out of the town, careful with every mile, until I finally reached a working station on a main road far away. I filled the tank with shaking hands and stood beside the car for a long time, feeling the sun on my face, feeling the relief and fear mixed together. In the days after the trip, I tried to make sense of what happened, but there was no clear explanation. I kept thinking about the empty town, the strange movement, the marks on the car, the long quiet hours in the dark where something stayed close and never showed itself fully. I thought about how easy it was to end up in a place where no one could hear me, where no one would ever know what happened if things had gone differently. I understood how fragile safety really was, how one wrong turn, one missed fuel stop, could lead to a place where the world felt empty and something unknown waited just beyond the edge of light. The ending of that road trip was simple but clear. I made it out. I survived. I drove away at sunrise with just enough fuel to escape. But the memory stayed with me, heavy and sharp, because I knew that whatever moved around my car that night was real, and it stayed there after I left, waiting in that silent town for the next person who would pass through, run out of fuel, and stop in the wrong place at the wrong time. I started the road trip early in the morning because I wanted to cover a long distance before dark. The plan was simple. I wanted to drive across a long stretch of highway that passed through empty land. Small towns, dry fields, hills, gas stations that looked worn out, and long straight roads that felt like they never ended. I thought it would be peaceful. I thought I would enjoy the silence and the empty spaces. I felt like I needed space from everything in my life, and driving alone on a long road felt like the right way to clear my head. The sky was pale and soft when I left my house, and the air felt cool. I packed simple things: water bottles, snacks, a spare tire, a small toolbox, a flashlight, a blanket, and a small bag of clothes. I checked the fuel, checked the tires, checked the oil, and felt calm when the engine started smoothly. I thought the day would stay simple. I thought nothing strange would happen. I believed that the biggest problem I would face would be boredom or fatigue. At first, the highway felt wide and open. The traffic near the city was light, and then it slowly faded until I could see only a few cars far ahead or far behind. After some time, I reached a place where the land opened into wide fields. The grass looked dry and pale. There were fences that looked broken in some places, leaning like they had been ignored for many years. The wind pushed the grass and dust across the road, and I could see long straight lines that stretched into the distance until they blended with the sky. The road felt endless. The sound of the engine and the tires against the rough road became steady, like a constant low vibration inside the car. There were no houses near the highway, no people walking, no shops, no signs of daily life. Just long roads, dry fields, broken wooden poles, and sometimes an old barn that looked empty and abandoned. I started to feel small, like the world around me was wide and uncaring, and I was just moving through it. I kept driving for hours, The heat grew stronger as the sun rose higher. The air inside the car felt heavy even with the windows slightly open. The empty land around me began to feel different, not peaceful anymore, but lonely in a way that pressed against my chest. There was no sound except the engine, the movement of the wind, and the dull humming inside my head from the long drive. The longer I stayed on that road, the more it felt like time slowed down. After a long stretch with no gas station, I saw a small sign that said there was fuel ahead. The paint on the sign was faded, and the metal was rusty. I checked my gauge and saw that the fuel was getting low. It felt smarter to stop instead of taking risks, especially on a road where help was not easy to find. So I kept driving until I saw a small gas station on the side of the road. The gas station looked old and forgotten. The paint on the walls had peeled away. The roof looked uneven. The pavement was cracked with weeds growing through it. There were no other cars there, and the place felt silent. The windows were dusty, and I could not tell if anyone was inside. The air felt strange there, like the world around me had stopped moving. I parked near the pump and turned off the car. The sudden silence felt heavy. I stepped out and stretched my legs. The area around the gas station felt empty in every direction. Only dry land, broken fences, and cracked soil lay around it. I filled the tank, trying to stay calm, trying not to think too much about how empty the place felt. While I was standing there, I felt like someone might be watching me, even though I saw no one. I could not hear any voices, any steps, or any noise from inside the building. But there was a quiet tension in the air that made my skin feel tight. I finished fueling, paid inside the small office where everything looked old and dusty, and came back to my car as quickly as I could. I got back on the road. The land grew even more empty ahead. The highway narrowed, the surface became rougher, and the paint lines faded. The wind pushed dust across the surface, and in some places the road seemed to disappear into dirt for a short distance before turning back to asphalt again. I had no signal on my phone. No connection, no map updates, no messages. It made the road feel even more isolated. As the day moved on, clouds gathered and blocked the sun. The sky turned gray, and the light lost its warmth. The world began to look colder and flatter. The temperature felt strange, not cool and not warm, but uncomfortable. My hands felt sweaty on the steering wheel, and my back felt tense from sitting too long. The road ahead looked the same for miles, and sometimes I felt like I had passed the same stretch before. I kept driving, and after some time I noticed something in the distance. A car was parked on the side of the highway, slightly tilted, like one of the tires was flat. It looked old and dusty, and I could not see anyone near it. As I got closer, I slowed a little, just enough to look. The windows were dark, and the car looked abandoned. Something about it felt wrong. The doors were closed, and there were marks in the dirt near the tires, like someone had walked around it many times. I felt uneasy but kept driving. I told myself that maybe someone had been picked up by another car or walked to find help earlier. Still, my chest felt tight, and I could not shake the feeling that something bad had happened there. The empty road made every strange sight feel more intense, like there was no safety anywhere. I drove farther and noticed that the landscape changed again. The road began to twist slightly, and broken hills appeared on both sides. The rocks were dull gray, and the plants were dry and thin. There were no houses, no signs, no sounds. The sky was darker now, not from night, but from heavy clouds that covered the sun completely. After a while, I realized that the fuel gauge had started dropping faster than before. I checked my last receipt and saw that I had filled the tank, but the needle was already moving lower than what felt normal for the distance I had covered. It made me nervous because there had been no sign of another town or gas station for a long time, and I did not know how far the next one would be. The road became quieter. I felt like the world around me had grown heavier. My shoulders were tight, and my breathing felt shallow without me meaning for it to happen. The sky turned dim early, like evening was coming too soon. I could feel that the day was ending, but I still had no place to stop, no town ahead, no safe place to rest. I kept driving because I had no choice. I could not turn back easily, and staying in the middle of the empty highway felt worse than moving forward. The miles stretched on. The light faded until the world turned dark, and I had to switch on my headlights. The beams cut through the darkness, showing the cracked road, drifting dust, and lonely road signs that looked worn out and crooked. As night settled in, the silence inside the car grew heavier. The darkness outside felt thick, like it swallowed everything beyond the edge of the headlights. I watched the road carefully, but after hours of seeing only empty asphalt and shadows, I started to feel like the world ahead did not want me to leave. The fuel gauge dropped again. Now it was dangerously low. I began to worry that the car would stop in the middle of nowhere in the dark. My chest tightened even more. My hands felt shaky, and my mouth felt dry. The thought of being stuck with no signal, no people, no light anywhere near me filled me with fear. Then it happened. The engine started to sputter. The force of the car began to weaken. The sound of the motor lost its steady rhythm. A cold wave ran through my body when I realized the fuel was almost gone. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was beating hard inside my chest. The car rolled forward a little longer and then slowed until it barely moved. I guided it onto the side of the road. The engine died. The world went silent again except for the faint wind outside. I sat still for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, staring into the darkness ahead, realizing where I was. I was alone on a long, empty highway in the middle of nowhere, at night, with no fuel, no signal, and no nearby town. The darkness outside felt deeper than before. The headlights stayed on for a short time, dimmer and weaker, before they finally went out. The car was dead. There was no noise, no light, nothing but the night surrounding me. My mind filled with fear, but not the kind that came from imagination. It was a real fear that came from knowing I was trapped in a dangerous situation with no easy way out. I thought about staying in the car, but the silence felt wrong. The air inside felt heavy and suffocating. I stepped out. The night air was cold. The road ahead and behind looked endless and black. There was no starlight, no moon, just a thick darkness that swallowed everything outside the faint shape of the car. I could barely see the outlines of the land around me. The wind pushed small pieces of dirt and dry grass across the surface of the road. Every sound felt sharper because of how quiet everything else was. My breath sounded loud in my ears. My footsteps sounded strange on the rough pavement. I walked around the car and checked my supplies. I still had some water, the blanket, the tools, the flashlight. I turned the flashlight on, and the small beam created a narrow tunnel of light in the darkness. The empty land around me looked even more disturbing when seen through that narrow light. I stood there for a long moment, thinking about what to do. The highway was quiet. No cars passed. No engines sounded in the distance. It felt like the road had been abandoned completely, like I was the only person left moving through it. I decided to stay near the car for the night because walking in darkness on a road with unknown distance to the next town felt too risky. I spread the blanket inside the car and tried to rest, but I could not sleep. Every sound made me tense. The wind against the car metal, the ticking of the cooling engine, the faint rustling of dry grass outside. I felt like something was out there, not something unreal, not anything supernatural, but something real, maybe human, maybe animal, maybe dangerous. The fear came from not knowing, from not being able to see, from being alone in a place where help was far away. Hours passed slowly. The night felt endless. My body was tired, but my mind stayed awake with fear. From time to time, I looked through the windows, but everything was dark and empty. I tried to stay calm. I tried to tell myself that nothing was there, that the fear was only in my head, but the silence carried weight that I could not ignore. Near the deepest part of the night, I heard something faint outside. It was not loud. It was not sudden. It was slow, soft, and irregular, like steps moving across dry ground. The sound came from somewhere behind the car. My body froze. My chest tightened again, harder than before. My breath grew shallow. I held the flashlight in my hand, but I did not want to turn it on yet because I was afraid of what I might see. The sound stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. I waited, barely breathing, listening for anything else. After some time, the sound came again, this time from the other side of the car. Slow movement, dry grass shifting, light pressure against dirt. It sounded like someone walking without wanting to be heard. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel it in my throat. I stayed still, trying not to make any sound. I knew there were no houses nearby. No one would just walk on this road at night for no reason. The thought that someone might be moving around my car made the fear inside me grow sharp and cold. I turned the flashlight on and pointed it toward the windows, but all I could see was dust on the glass and the reflection of the light inside. I slowly opened the car door and stepped out, my legs weak, my hands shaking. I pointed the flashlight toward the back of the car. There was nothing there, just dirt, cracked pavement, dry plants, and shadows stretching across the ground. But the feeling did not go away. The air still felt tense. My skin still felt tight. I slowly turned in a circle, shining the light around me, scanning every inch of the empty land. The light caught broken rocks, scattered trash, small plants, and the empty road. I did not see anyone, but the fear stayed inside my chest, deep and strong. I went back into the car and locked the doors. I sat there, gripping the flashlight, watching the darkness slowly swallow what little my eyes could make out. I waited through the rest of the night with no sleep, trapped in fear, trapped in silence, trapped in the middle of nowhere. When morning finally came, the sky slowly brightened. The darkness retreated, and shapes appeared again in the distance. The empty land looked large and lifeless under the pale light. I stepped out of the car, tired, numb, and heavy with fear from the long night. I walked around the car again and looked at the ground near the back. There were faint marks in the dirt. They did not look like animal prints. They looked like footprints, long, uneven, deep in some places, shallow in others, as if someone had walked slowly and circled around the car more than once during the night. The fear returned, but this time it felt colder and more real. Someone had been there. Someone had walked around my car while I sat inside, trapped in darkness, unaware of who they were or what they wanted. The thought made my stomach feel weak, and my hands felt numb as I stared at the marks. I knew I could not stay there any longer. I gathered my things and began walking along the road, hoping to find help, hoping to reach a town or a gas station. The sun rose slowly, but the land still felt empty and silent. The walk was long and my legs grew tired. The heat returned, and the road stretched on like an endless line. After hours of walking, I finally reached another gas station, one that looked a little more alive than the first one. I found help there and eventually returned to my car with fuel. When I reached it again, the footprints were still there in the dirt, clearer now in the bright daylight, circling the car in uneven paths. I felt a heavy weight in my chest as I stood there and looked at them. I filled the tank, started the engine, and drove away, but the fear did not leave me. Even as the road led me back toward places with people, houses, and noise, the memory of that night stayed inside me, sharp and cold. The ending of that road trip was not dramatic or loud. Nothing chased me, no one attacked me, no accident happened. But the real horror came from knowing that someone had been there in the darkness, close to me, circling my car while I was helpless, unaware of what they wanted or why they were there. The fear came from how real and possible it was. I finished the trip, but the experience changed the way I see empty roads and long highways forever. Now when I think about that night, I remember the silence, the darkness, the helpless feeling of the car dying in the middle of nowhere, and the footprints that proved that I was not truly alone even when I thought the world was empty. That is the clear ending to what happened on that road trip. The truth is simple but heavy. I survived, but the fear stayed with me, and I understood that sometimes the scariest moments come from real people in quiet places, where help is far away and danger does not need to show itself loudly to be real. I remember that road trip because it changed the way I look at empty highways and silent landscapes. It started as a simple plan. I wanted to drive across a long stretch of countryside to clear my head and spend some time alone. I had been feeling tired and trapped in my routine, so I thought a long drive would help me breathe better. I chose a route that stayed far from the big cities because I wanted peace and wide open roads. I told myself that empty land and long highways would feel calm, But I learned that there is a different kind of silence out there. A silence that feels heavy and watchful, and it follows you when no one else is around. I left early in the afternoon, and the first few hours felt normal. The sky was a dull gray, and the air felt dry. The road stretched forward like a thin line, and there were fields on both sides, empty and flat, with patches of dry grass and broken fences. The land looked like it had been forgotten a long time ago. I passed a few small towns that looked half abandoned, with old shops and faded paint on the walls. Some buildings had broken windows. Some houses looked empty, like no one had lived in them for years. I kept driving, telling myself that the peace was what I wanted. After some hours, traffic disappeared. No cars behind me, no cars ahead of me, just the road, the fields, and the sky. The road surface changed from smooth asphalt to rougher patches that made the steering wheel shake. I noticed small signs that were old and hard to read. Paint had peeled off them. Some signs leaned sideways like the wind had pushed them for years. I checked my fuel gauge and saw that I still had more than half a tank, so I kept going, thinking I would stop at the next gas station I saw. Time felt strange out there. The land barely changed. The same dry bushes, the same broken fences, the same cracked road. The more I drove, the more I felt like I wasn't moving forward at all. It was as if the world was repeating itself. I started to feel uneasy. I kept looking at the rearview mirror even though there was nothing behind me. The sun moved lower, and the sky began to darken, and I realized I had gone a long time without seeing a town or a rest stop. I checked my phone, and there was no signal. The little icon showed nothing. I held the phone up for a moment out of habit, even though I knew it would not change. As the sky turned darker, the land changed from dull gray to deep shadow. I turned my headlights on. The beams cut through the darkness, showing only a thin slice of the road ahead. The empty fields that had looked harmless in daylight now felt different. The darkness made them feel endless, like they could swallow anything. I started to notice small details that I had ignored before. Dead branches on the ground, fences that had collapsed, a ditch filled with tall weeds. Everything felt neglected, like this place had been slowly falling apart for years without anyone caring. I began to feel a slow weight in my chest. It wasn't fear at first, just discomfort. I told myself that I just needed to find a gas station or a rest area. My fuel gauge dropped lower as the miles went on. The needle moved closer to the quarter mark, then below it. I felt my throat tighten. I looked at the road for any sign of a rest stop, but there was nothing. No lights, no buildings, just darkness and land stretching forever. The night grew colder. I could feel the temperature drop inside the car. The road became narrower in some places, and the edges looked broken and uneven. I slowed down so I wouldn't hit anything. The sound of the engine felt louder because there was nothing else around. No wind, no animals, nothing moving outside, just silence pressing against the car. After a long stretch, I finally saw something in the distance. A small cluster of shapes on the side of the road. As I got closer, I saw an old building that looked like a gas station. The roof was sagging. The sign was faded and hard to read. The windows were dark. There were no lights, no movement, no sound. The pumps looked old and rusted, like they hadn't worked in years. I pulled into the lot anyway because my fuel was low and I didn't have another choice. The gravel under my tires made a rough crunching sound, loud against the quiet night. I parked near one of the pumps and turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt thick, heavier than before. The air outside looked still, like the world was holding its breath. I sat there for a moment, looking at the building. The glass on one of the windows was cracked. The door was slightly open, but not enough to see inside. The place smelled faintly of dust and old metal. I realized there were no houses nearby, no roads leading anywhere else, just this one building sitting alone in the middle of nothing. I thought about going inside to check if there was anyone, but something in my chest tightened. The building felt wrong. Not dangerous in a loud way, just wrong in a quiet, uneasy way, like stepping inside would mean accepting whatever had been left behind there. I stayed in the car and checked my fuel again. The gauge was low enough that turning back wasn't an option anymore. I would have to move forward and hope to find another station, or risk staying there through the night. I started the engine again and pulled back onto the road. The headlights lit the cracked pavement ahead. My hands felt tense on the steering wheel. I tried to stay calm, but the anxiety grew with every mile. The fuel gauge dropped lower and lower. The needle moved into the red. I felt sweat on my palms even though the air was cold. I kept moving because stopping felt worse than driving forward in the dark. At some point, I noticed something strange. The reflectors on the side of the road were missing in long stretches, and then they would suddenly reappear. The road markings faded in and out. Some parts looked like they had been repaired badly, as if someone had patched them without care. In other places, the road dipped suddenly, and I felt the car lurch slightly. I had to stay alert because one wrong movement could send me into a ditch in total darkness with no help around. The inside of the car felt smaller as time went on. The air felt stale. My breathing sounded loud. The shadows outside looked deeper than normal night shadows, like they were swallowing the edges of the road. I kept glancing to the sides, even though I knew there was nothing there. The emptiness itself became frightening. It felt like I was alone in a place that people no longer visited, a place that had been abandoned by time. The fuel warning light turned on, a small orange glow on the dashboard. My heart sank when I saw it. I knew I didn't have much distance left. I slowed my speed to save fuel, but the road stretched forward with no sign. No building, no light, nothing at all. The idea of the car stopping in the middle of that dark road with no signal, no sound, and no one around made my skin crawl. I imagined sitting there in silence, trapped in the car, watching darkness press against the windows for hours with no idea what might be out there. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw a faint light far ahead. It looked tiny, weak, like a small lamp in a huge dark field. I stared at it and kept driving toward it, hoping it was another gas station or at least some sign of life. As I got closer, I saw that it was a small roadside rest area with a single old building and a dim light fixed to the wall above the door. The light flickered slightly, like it was struggling to stay on. I pulled into the lot and stopped the car. The engine sounded tired. I turned it off to save fuel and sat there for a minute, breathing slowly. The building looked like a small rest stop with a restroom and maybe a storage room. The walls were stained and cracked. The paint peeled away in thin strips. The door was closed. The flickering light made the shadows around the building move in strange ways, stretching and shrinking across the walls and ground. The place felt abandoned, yet not completely dead. It felt like something had once been there and had left in a hurry. The silence wrapped around the building like a thick blanket. I listened for insects, for wind, for anything, but there was nothing. Even the air smelled still, like old concrete and dry dust. I stepped out of the car for a moment to stretch my legs. The ground felt cold under my shoes. The night air brushed against my skin, but it didn't feel fresh. It felt heavy, like the air in a closed room that hasn't been opened for years. I walked slowly around the front of the building, staying close to the light. The shadows around the edges of the lot looked deeper than they should have been, as if the darkness there was thicker and heavier. I thought about trying the door, but I didn't want to touch it. The rusted metal handle looked rough and unpleasant. I felt like if I opened that door, I would step into a place I didn't want to see, a place full of things left behind by people who had passed through before me, people who might have felt the same fear I was feeling now. The building felt like it had stored all of that fear inside its walls. I went back to the car and sat inside, locking the doors. I turned the key halfway to power the dashboard and checked the fuel gauge again. It was almost empty. I realized I might have to stay there for the rest of the night, waiting until morning to try again. The idea of sitting there in darkness for hours made my stomach tighten, but I didn't have any better choice. Time passed slowly. The light on the building flickered, dimmed, then brightened again. The shadows crawled along the pavement. The longer I sat there, the more I felt like the rest area wasn't completely still. It felt like the place itself was watching me, not with eyes, but with its silence and emptiness, like it was testing how long I could sit there before the quiet broke me. I tried to rest, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt like the darkness outside was pressing closer to the windows. I kept imagining the engine failing completely, leaving me with no power, No lights, just darkness inside and outside. I imagined the night swallowing the car. I opened my eyes again and stared at the dashboard, watching the small lights and indicators like they were my last connection to the world. At some point late in the night, I heard a faint sound. Not a loud noise, not anything clear, just a distant, soft scrape, like something brushing against rough concrete far away. It was so quiet that I almost thought I imagined it. I held my breath and listened. The sound faded, then nothing. The silence returned, heavier than before. I didn't move. I just sat there with tense muscles, staring at the windshield, trying to tell myself that it could have been anything. A loose piece of metal shifting in the wind, or a small animal moving near the building. But the sound stayed in my head, and now every small noise inside the car felt loud. The ticking of the cooling engine, the faint creak of the seat, my own breathing. Everything felt sharper, like my senses were stretched thin. I felt trapped between staying inside the car and stepping out into the darkness, and both choices felt wrong. The rest of the night passed slowly, each minute feeling like an hour. I waited for the first sign of morning like it was the only thing that could save me. The sky eventually began to lighten, not quickly, but gradually, the darkness fading into a dull gray. The first thin hint of daylight felt unreal, like the world was slowly coming back after being gone for too long. When the light grew strong enough, I could finally see the rest area clearly. The building looked even more broken than it had at night. The walls were cracked, the roof sagged, and weeds grew up through the cracks in the concrete. There were old stains on the ground, marks left by vehicles that had come and gone years before. The place looked empty in a way that felt final, like it had been abandoned and left to rot without anyone ever returning. I tried the car again and saw that the fuel gauge was barely above empty. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had only one choice left, and that was to keep driving slowly and pray that I would reach another town before the tank ran dry. The morning light made the land look wider, but it didn't make it feel safer. The emptiness was still there, stretching in every direction. I pulled out of the lot and continued down the road. The car moved slowly, the engine sounding tired. I watched the gauge as it dropped even lower. The land stayed empty for a long time. The same dry fields, the same broken fences, the same feeling that this place had been forgotten by everyone except me. I kept going because there was nothing else to do. Finally, after what felt like the longest stretch of road I had ever driven, I saw another sign of life in the distance. A small town appeared on the horizon, quiet and worn down, but real. I saw buildings, a few parked vehicles, and most importantly, a gas station with newer pumps. My chest loosened for the first time in hours. I rolled into the station just as the car felt like it was about to die. The engine sputtered slightly as I stopped near a pump. I turned off the car and sat there for a moment, breathing deeply, shaking slightly from exhaustion and stress. The town looked empty and quiet, but compared to the miles of darkness and abandoned places behind me, it felt like safety. The morning air smelled different here. It smelled like fuel, dust, and distant cooking smoke. It smelled like people existed somewhere near, even if I couldn't see them yet. I filled the tank slowly, watching the numbers rise, feeling like every drop of fuel was pulling me back into the world I knew. The daylight continued to grow stronger, pushing away the heavy shadows of the night. The road behind me felt like a long, dark memory, something real but distant, like a place I had barely escaped from. When I finished fueling, I got back into the car and sat quietly for a while. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were still tense, knuckles pale. I realized then how deeply the night had affected me. It wasn't just the darkness or the emptiness. It was the silence, the isolation, the feeling of being lost in a place where time and people had stopped matching. It was the thought of the engine dying out there in the middle of nothing, with no signal, no sound, no one around, and no way to know how long I would have to wait. Driving away from that town later, I stayed on larger roads. I avoided quiet routes, avoided long empty highways, avoided anything that looked too still. The open countryside no longer felt peaceful. It felt like a mask that could drop at any time and reveal miles of darkness and silence underneath. That trip changed the way I think about road travel. Now, When I see long stretches of empty land and lonely roads disappearing into the horizon, I don't think about freedom anymore. I think about that night, the abandoned buildings, the broken fences, the failing fuel gauge, the weight of the silence, and the feeling of being alone in a place that seemed to have let go of the world. The ending of that journey was clear in my mind the moment I left that small town behind. I understood that I had pushed myself too far into isolation, thinking I wanted peace, but instead I found a darker kind of quiet that stripped away comfort and made me face how fragile I really was out there. I reached safety again and I kept moving forward, but the experience stayed with me as a reminder that some places are empty for a reason. And sometimes the scariest thing in the world is not what you see, but the feeling of being completely alone in a vast, silent place with no one to call and nowhere to go if something goes wrong. That road trip ended with me returning home, tired, shaken, and different. I knew I would never again look at a dark highway the same way. The memory of that night, the stillness, the isolation, the near-empty tank, and the endless stretch of road will always stay inside me, as clear and heavy as the darkness that surrounded me out there, reminding me that sometimes the real fear on a road trip has nothing to do with monsters or fantasies, but with the quiet truth of how small and vulnerable a person can feel when the world around them becomes nothing but empty land, fading light, and miles of dark road with no one else in sight. I had been planning this road trip for months, ever since I realized I needed a break from everything in my life. Work had become a constant blur of stress, emails, and meetings, and the city felt suffocating. I wanted to go somewhere open, somewhere empty, somewhere I could just drive until I had no idea where I was anymore. I didn't plan much, just a route on a map that followed the less-traveled highways and country roads, a backpack full of essentials, and my old sedan that I had kept in decent shape over the years. The plan was simple: leave early in the morning, avoid the highways, see where the day took me, and sleep in the car or in small motels along the way. I thought it would be peaceful, maybe even fun, a little adventure alone with my thoughts. The first few hours were exactly what I hoped for. The city blurred behind me, and the flat gray buildings were replaced by rolling hills, fields, and the occasional patch of dense trees. My music played softly, but mostly I just listened to the hum of the tires and the wind outside. There was a calmness in knowing that no one was expecting me anywhere. No deadlines, no obligations. The road stretched ahead in perfect solitude, only broken occasionally by the yellow lines in the middle of the asphalt. The sun was bright, the sky was clear, and for a while, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. By late afternoon, I was deep in a stretch of road that I hadn't seen marked on any of my maps. It was narrow, 2 lanes barely wide enough for my car, and the asphalt was cracked in places, overgrown with weeds that had pushed through the edges. The forest pressed close on both sides, dark and tall, like a wall of green that blocked out the rest of the world. I noticed a small sign that read "Private Property, No Trespassing," leaning at a slight angle, almost hidden by the trees. My curiosity didn't have much reason to steer me one way or another, so I kept driving, the car rattling over small cracks and loose stones. The feeling of isolation started to creep in, slow and subtle at first, just a quiet awareness that I hadn't seen another car for maybe 30 minutes. Then 40. I couldn't even remember the last time I had seen someone walking along the road. The lights started to shift, the sun dropping behind the trees, painting the road in long shadows. It was the kind of light that makes everything look familiar and strange at the same time, like a painting I had seen before but not closely. I realized I was somewhere I didn't recognize at all. The map on my phone was useless here. The signal had dropped hours ago, and the GPS marker showed me floating somewhere in the middle of nothing. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe I would find a turn or a town soon. But the road didn't seem to end. The forest closed in more, and the occasional rustle of leaves sounded louder in the quiet. I started to notice small things. A piece of paper on the road, weathered and torn. Tire tracks in the dirt at a sharp turn that looked recent. A broken fence that ran along one side of the road. The feeling of being watched, or at least observed, started to creep in, slow and insistent. My skin prickled, but I shrugged it off. telling myself it was just nerves and my imagination. After an hour of this, I realized I needed gas, water, or at least some sign of civilization. My tank was getting low, and the car's little warning light started to blink. I hadn't seen a gas station or a building of any kind in over an hour. The road had become even narrower, and in places, the trees leaned in so close I had to keep one hand on the steering wheel to avoid brushing the branches. The shadows were deepening fast, and soon I realized I had no idea how much longer I could drive before it got completely dark. My phone was nearly dead, only enough battery to light up the screen for a few seconds at a time. Then I saw it, a small cabin off the side of the road. It looked abandoned, like it had been there for decades. The paint was peeling, the windows dark and cracked, and a thin trail of smoke rose from a small chimney. I parked at the edge of the road, hesitating, because part of me knew it wasn't a safe idea. But I needed water, maybe a phone signal, maybe just a place to rest for a few minutes. I walked up the narrow path leading to the cabin, the weeds brushing my legs, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. The front door was slightly ajar. I pushed it carefully, and it creaked loudly. Inside, the cabin was small, sparsely furnished with what looked like furniture left decades ago. There was a rusted stove, a table covered in dust, and a single chair. I found a small bucket of water in the corner, probably left from a well nearby. I drank slowly, trying to calm myself. That's when I noticed the footprints. Small, fresh, leading from the back door to the front, stopping just short of where I stood. I froze. They were human, and they were recent. My heart started racing, and I backed toward the door, but it had slammed shut behind me. I tried to open it, but it was stuck. I banged on it, my mind racing, and finally managed to push it open enough to slip out. The air outside felt colder, heavier, and the light was almost gone, the sun having disappeared behind the trees. I ran back to my car and locked the doors. I started the engine, my hands shaking, and pulled back onto the road. That was when I realized the forest had changed. The road twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember, and the shadows were longer, darker, almost alive. I drove faster, my headlights cutting through the black, watching for anything that might be on the road, but there was nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It grew heavier, pressing in from the trees on both sides. Every rustle, every snap of a branch made my stomach drop. I tried to keep my mind rational, telling myself it was just animals or wind or my own nerves. But I knew deep down something wasn't right. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes, I couldn't tell. The road stretched endlessly, twisting through the forest with no sign of an end. My gas light had been blinking for a while, and I was down to barely a quarter tank. My phone finally gave me 1 bar of signal, enough to check the map. I saw a small dot, a town not far from where I was. Relief surged through me. I drove toward it, but the road seemed to fight me, twisting, turning, looping back on itself. Every time I thought I recognized a landmark, it changed, like the forest was rearranging itself. My hands were white from gripping the wheel so tightly, my eyes strained from trying to see through the darkness. Then I saw headlights behind me. At first, I felt relief. Another car, someone else out here. But as it got closer, I realized something was wrong. The car didn't pass me, didn't flash, didn't slow down. It just followed, perfectly matched to my speed, keeping exactly the same distance. My heart pounded. I tried to accelerate, but the road was narrow, and I didn't want to risk losing control. The headlights stayed behind me, unwavering. I turned onto a side road, hoping to lose it, but the car followed. Every turn, every bend, it was there. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands trembling so badly I could barely steer. I had never been so terrified in my life. I knew I had to think. I had to escape, but there was nowhere to go. I remembered seeing a gas station on the map, a tiny dot not far ahead. I headed toward it, praying it was still there. The forest thinned slightly, and I could see the faint glow of lights in the distance. Hope. I pressed the accelerator harder, feeling the tires grip the cracked asphalt. The headlights stayed behind me, but I was closer to the lights now. I could see the pumps, the building, and a single figure moving inside. I pulled in, heart hammering, and ran into the store, slamming the door behind me. The bell above the door rang, and I collapsed against the counter, gasping. The attendant looked at me, confused, but didn't ask questions. I explained quickly, barely forming words, and they nodded. I grabbed a pump, filled my tank, and noticed the car outside. The other car had stopped at the edge of the lot, but there was no one inside. I watched it for a long minute, unsure what to do, but finally, it turned and drove away, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed there for hours, letting my pulse slow, watching the forest beyond the station. Eventually, I drove out slowly, taking the highway, avoiding any small roads. The lights of civilization felt like salvation, the hum of traffic comforting. I realized later that I had been lucky. There was no magic, no ghost, just an empty, isolated road, a stranger following me, and a series of choices that could have ended badly. I made it home safely, exhausted, shaken, but alive. I never took another road like that alone again, and I never forgot the way the forest seemed to close in, the way the night could hide anything, the way real fear can twist a simple road trip into something terrifying. Even now, years later, when I drive on quiet roads, I can feel that tension creep back in, and I remember that night in the forest, and the way every shadow can feel like a threat when you are truly alone. I started the road trip early in the morning because I wanted to cover a long distance before sunset. The air outside felt cold when I stepped out of my house, and the sky still looked dark blue with only a thin line of pale orange on the horizon. I carried my bag to the car and placed it in the back seat, making sure everything was arranged in a neat way so nothing would move around when the car started rolling. I checked the tires, the mirrors, and the fuel level, and I stood there for a moment while the quiet street around me felt empty and silent. I could feel the early morning chill on my face, and my hands felt stiff from the cold as I gripped the steering wheel. I turned on the engine and listened to the low, steady sound of it, and I watched small, thin clouds of white mist come out of my mouth when I breathed. The plan was simple in my head. I wanted to drive across a long stretch of highway that cut through empty countryside, then through desert-like land, and then finally toward a mountain area where I would rest in a small town for the night. I kept thinking about how easy it sounded when I planned it at home. I believed the road would be calm and peaceful, and I thought the long, empty highway would feel relaxing. I told myself that the silence would be good for my mind, that I would enjoy the open road and the wide, empty landscapes, and that I would feel free. The first hours of driving felt calm and quiet. The road looked smooth and long, and there were only a few other cars that passed by from time to time. The sun slowly rose higher, and the sky changed color from soft orange to bright pale blue. The fields on both sides of the road looked flat and endless, and the wind made the dry grass move in slow waves. I could feel the vibration of the car through the seat and the steering wheel, and I paid attention to every sound, like the constant hum of the engine and the faint noise of the tires rolling over the asphalt. After some time, the towns became less frequent, and the land around me started to look empty and wide. The buildings disappeared, the trees became rare, and the road stretched ahead in a straight, lonely line. I watched abandoned structures on the side of the road, small broken sheds, rusted fences, and old signs with faded paint. The sight of them made me think about how long they had been left there, and how many travelers had driven past without stopping. The road started to feel like a place where people only passed through, not a place where anyone stayed. The weather slowly changed as I drove farther. The air became dry, the land looked dusty, and the color of the ground shifted to a dull brown. The heat rose from the road, and I could see thin waves in the distance where the horizon looked blurry. The silence around the highway felt heavier now. I looked at my phone several times and noticed that the signal bars kept dropping until they disappeared completely. I knew I was now in a place where I could not call anyone if something went wrong, and that thought stayed quietly in the back of my mind while I kept driving. The road signs showed fewer distances and fewer destinations. There were long stretches without rest stops or gas stations. I checked the fuel gauge several times, feeling a slow uneasiness grow in my chest. I kept telling myself that everything was fine, but the empty landscape made me feel like I was moving deeper and deeper into a place where help did not exist. The sun rose higher, and its heat pressed against the car as time passed. After many hours, I noticed something unusual. A damaged car appeared ahead on the side of the road. It looked old and dusty, and it was parked at an angle near a dry patch of ground. The windows were dark, and the paint was dull and scratched. I slowed down a little as I passed it, and I felt a strange discomfort while looking at it. There was no sign of anyone nearby. No person, no movement, nothing around it except dry land and silence. The car looked like it had been there for a long time, but something about it felt recent at the same time, like it had only been abandoned a short while ago. I kept driving, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. The road grew even quieter. After some time, I saw another car on the side of the road. This one was also dusty and empty, and it had one tire missing. The trunk was slightly open, and I could see scattered objects on the ground near it, like small tools and pieces of fabric. Again, there was no one around. The scene felt wrong in a way that made my body tense. I could feel my heartbeat become slower but heavier, as if my body sensed danger before my thoughts could fully understand it. The farther I drove, the more I felt like the road was leading me into something I did not understand. The land around me looked endless, but it also felt trapped, like I was moving deeper into a maze made of open space. The sky above looked wide and empty, but the emptiness made me feel smaller and weaker instead of free. The silence started to feel thick, like it was pressing against my ears. I could hear every movement of my own body inside the car. My breathing sounded louder. The sound of my heartbeat echoed in my head. After some more miles, I started to notice faint marks on the road. Thin black lines, like worn tire marks, drifted off to the side in random directions before fading into the dirt. I kept thinking about the abandoned cars, about the missing people, about how none of them seemed to have finished their journey. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the road, the wheel, the white line on the side, the slow movement of the horizon. But the feeling kept growing inside me, slow and heavy and steady. The heat inside the car became worse as the day went on. My hands felt sticky against the steering wheel. Sweat collected on my back and neck, and my clothes stuck to my skin. My mouth felt dry even though I drank water from the bottle I kept beside me. The air smelled like warm plastic and dust, and the sound of the wind outside felt dull and distant. After a long stretch of emptiness, I finally saw something ahead. At first it looked like a small rest area, but as I got closer I realized it was just a wide dirt clearing beside the road with a broken wooden shelter and a rusted trash bin. The wood of the shelter looked gray and cracked, and the posts leaned slightly, as if time had pushed them down little by little. The trash bin was empty except for a few scraps of paper stuck to the bottom. The whole place felt abandoned, but not in a peaceful way. It felt like people had once stopped there but had left in a hurry, and then no one came back. I parked the car and stepped out for a moment to stretch my legs. The heat hit me harder when I stood outside. The air felt dry and rough in my throat, and the ground beneath my shoes felt hot. The silence was deep, almost hollow. There was no wind, no insects, no birds, nothing. The land stretched out in every direction with no signs of life. I looked around slowly, turning my head, scanning the empty space. I felt exposed, like I was standing in the middle of a wide open target where anything could happen and I would have nowhere to hide. As I stood there, I noticed something strange on the ground behind the shelter. There were faint marks in the dirt, like footsteps, but not very clear. They looked old but still defined enough to be seen. They led away from the shelter and disappeared into the dry land. I stared at them for a long time, thinking about where they led, thinking about who made them, thinking about whether the person ever returned. I started to feel uneasy again, stronger than before. It felt like the empty land was not really empty, like something watched me from far away, something that I could not see but that could see me. I felt a cold sensation move slowly up my back even though the day was burning hot. I got back into the car, closed the door, and locked it without even thinking. I sat there for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling my chest rise and fall, listening to the sound of the engine and my own heartbeat. and I decided to continue driving without stopping again for a long time. The farther I went, the more the road changed. The asphalt became rougher, cracked in places, with patches of uneven surface that made the car shake and rattle. The land around me became rockier, with scattered stones and dry bushes that looked sharp and dead. The sky looked pale and washed out, like the color had been drained from it. The light felt harsh, and every shape looked sharp and uncomfortable to look at. At some point, I noticed a faint movement in the distance, far ahead on the side of the road. It looked like a small shape near the ground. As I got closer, I realized it was an animal lying still near the shoulder of the road. It looked thin and weak, like it had been there for a long time under the heat. The sight of it made my stomach feel tight. It reminded me that this place was not made for life, that anything left out here too long would slowly fade away. Time started to feel strange as I continued driving. I could not tell how many hours had passed anymore. The road looked endless, always stretching forward in the same straight line. The landscape did not change. The same colors, the same shapes, the same empty silence. It felt like I was not moving at all, like I was stuck inside a loop where the world repeated itself again and again. Then, after a long while, I saw something ahead that made my body tense instantly. It was another car, but this one was not abandoned on the side. It was stopped right in the middle of the road. The doors were closed, and the windows were dark, and there was no movement inside. The car looked newer than the others I had seen earlier, but it still looked out of place in the emptiness. I slowed down and stopped at a distance, my hands tight on the steering wheel. The silence around me felt heavier now, pressing against my mind. I stared at the car, waiting for something to happen, waiting for a sign that someone was inside. But nothing moved. No engine sound, no shape, no shadow. The road ahead was blocked, and the land on both sides looked rough and uneven, making it hard to go around. I sat there for a long time, thinking, breathing slowly, feeling fear build inside my chest in slow waves. I looked around at the empty land and felt a strong sense that I should not get out of my car. The stillness of the other vehicle felt wrong. It did not feel like a car that had simply broken down. It felt like something placed there, something with purpose, something that did not belong to chance. My thoughts grew darker. I imagined someone hiding nearby, watching, waiting. I imagined danger that I could not see but that existed somewhere in the heat and dust. I could feel my throat tighten, my palms grow wet, my breathing become shallow. The world around me felt larger and emptier at the same time, and I felt small and trapped inside it. I made the decision to reverse slowly and find another route, even if it meant turning back for miles. I backed up carefully, keeping my eyes on the car ahead, watching every small detail, waiting for any sign of movement. But nothing changed. The car remained still and silent, like a dead object placed in the middle of the road. Once I was far enough back, I turned the car around and drove in the opposite direction. My heart felt heavy, and my mind filled with uneasy thoughts. I realized now that this road was not just empty. It was dangerous in a quiet, silent way that did not scream or threaten openly. It was the kind of danger that slowly tightened itself around you without you noticing until it was too late. The drive back felt even worse than before. Every abandoned car, every broken sign, every empty patch of land now felt like a warning. I kept thinking about the people who never finished their trips, whose cars still sat out here like silent markers of something that went wrong. I thought about how easy it was to disappear in a place like this, where no one could hear you, where no one would ever find you. Eventually, the landscape began to change again, slowly and gradually. The dry rocks turned back into dusty fields, then into patches of wheatgrass, then into distant signs of farmland. I felt a slow relief growing inside me, but it was mixed with exhaustion and fear that still clung to my thoughts. When the first town finally appeared far ahead, small and faint on the horizon, I felt my body relax for the first time in hours. I reached the town just before evening. The sky had turned a dull orange, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. The streets felt quiet, but they did not feel empty in the same way as the road I had left behind. I parked the car and sat there for a long time before turning the engine off. My hands were still shaking, My body felt weak and heavy. That night, I lay in a room with a solid roof above me and walls around me, yet I could not sleep. I closed my eyes and all I could see was the endless empty road, the abandoned cars, the silent marks in the dirt, the stopped vehicle blocking the way. I thought about how easily I could have stepped out of my car, how easily I could have walked towards something that felt wrong without realizing it, how easily I could have become another silent object left behind in the heat. The ending of that day stayed with me and remained clear in my mind. I understood something important about fear, about isolation, about places where there is no sound, no help, no witness. I realized that the most frightening things are not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes they are silent, still, and patient. Sometimes danger waits in empty spaces where nothing seems to move, where everything looks harmless on the surface. I finished the trip, but the experience changed how I see lonely roads forever. Whenever I think about traveling again through distant empty places, I remember that feeling of being watched by something I could not see, that sense of being pulled into a space where people vanish without a trace. I remember how close I came to stepping into something I did not understand. And I know now that the road is not always just a path from one place to another. Sometimes it is a silent trap, stretching forward under the open sky, waiting for the next person who believes they are completely alone. I had been planning this road trip for months, meticulously mapping out every stop, every route, and every possibility of where I might sleep or eat along the way. The car was packed with enough supplies to last a week, including bottled water, snacks, a first aid kit, blankets, a flashlight, and extra gas cans. I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I had decided to take the long way across the state, tracing old highways and rural roads I had never traveled before, because I wanted solitude, a real sense of escape from the crowded highways and noisy towns. At first, it had seemed like freedom, the kind that comes from driving through empty landscapes where the horizon stretches endlessly and the only sound is the hum of tires on asphalt. The first day was easy. I left early, before sunrise, and the roads were empty. The air inside the car was cool. The faint smell of pine from the nearby forests mixed with the lingering scent of coffee from a thermos I had filled that morning. I rolled down the windows just a little to feel the chill, and the light gradually changed from blue to gold as the sun rose over distant hills. It felt cinematic, almost unreal, like the kind of thing people described in movies but rarely experienced. I made a few short stops along the way. A small diner with peeling paint where the waitress gave me coffee without much expression. A gas station that seemed almost abandoned except for a lone clerk who barely looked up from a crossword puzzle. The emptiness felt normal, comforting even, like I had stepped out of the usual pace of life into a quiet, isolated bubble. By the second day, the scenery changed. Small towns became rarer, replaced by stretches of dense forest and open fields with signs warning of wildlife or narrow bridges. I kept my music low, mostly instrumental stuff, because I liked hearing the subtle noises of the road, the tires crunching slightly on rough asphalt, the wind brushing against the car, the occasional bird flying overhead. That evening, I stopped at a rest area off a minor highway to stretch my legs. The sun had just set, casting long shadows that made everything look darker and heavier than it actually was. I refilled my water bottle and checked my map, noticing that the next stretch of road would take me through an area where cell service was unreliable for several miles. I wasn't worried. I was used to being alone, and the idea of isolation felt normal, even pleasant at that point. The trouble started when I turned off the main highway onto a smaller road that wound through thick woods. The pavement became rougher, patches of asphalt missing or cracked, and soon there were no signs of civilization at all. No houses, no lights, nothing but trees and the fading echo of my engine. The GPS signal flickered and then disappeared completely, leaving me with only a printed map and the memory of the route I had planned. At first, it didn't bother me. I had anticipated this, the silence, the feeling of being somewhere completely removed from other people. I told myself it was part of the adventure, part of the experience I had wanted so badly. After a while, I noticed something strange. The road signs had stopped appearing altogether. There were no mile markers, no warnings about curves or speed limits. Nothing. Just the winding asphalt cutting through the woods. The sun had set completely, and darkness enveloped everything outside the car. My headlights cut narrow slices of light into the blackness, illuminating the occasional tree trunk or roadside debris. But beyond that, the forest seemed endless, like a solid wall of darkness. The air felt heavier here, colder somehow, and my own breathing sounded louder than usual inside the car. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just the unfamiliarity that made my heart race, but a creeping sense of unease settled over me. I reached a section of the road where it became uneven and narrow, barely wide enough for one car. The asphalt was crumbling at the edges, and I had to drive carefully to avoid the potholes and jagged sections. That's when I first noticed the car behind me. It had appeared suddenly in my rearview mirror, its headlights faint but visible. I hadn't seen it coming at all, and there were no intersections or side roads for miles. I checked my mirrors, even slowed down slightly to see if it would pass me, but it didn't. It stayed there, maintaining distance, just following. First, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe someone else was traveling the same road. But as time passed, I realized the headlights never wavered, never passed me, never turned off. The distance between us stayed exactly the same. It was unnerving, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I considered pulling over, but the sides of the road were overgrown with brush, uneven, and dangerous. There was nowhere safe to stop. My heart beat faster. I tried to stay logical, telling myself the driver might just be on the same route, unaware of how small the road was. But as minutes turned into miles, the lack of any sign of civilization made the thought of being followed feel very real. I considered calling someone, but I had no service. The map in my hand seemed useless now. It couldn't tell me whether there were side roads or exits that might appear in the dark. All I could do was keep driving. Then I saw it. Something on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer, but the way it moved wasn't quite right. It didn't dart away when I approached. It stayed just at the edge of the light from my headlights, tall and unmoving for a moment, then retreating slightly as if keeping pace with me. My chest tightened, and a cold sweat broke out on my neck. I drove faster, not recklessly, but enough to put some distance between me and the strange presence. The car behind me followed without hesitation. Every twist in the road seemed sharper now, every shadow darker, and the tires crunched over broken asphalt that made the car shudder. Hours passed like this. Every turn of the road, every rustle in the trees, sent spikes of fear through me. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, and every time, the car was there, calmly following, like it had been waiting for me to make a mistake. The idea of trying to lose it became impossible. The road was narrow and twisting, with only one route forward, and I had no idea where it would lead. Panic rose and fell in waves. I kept thinking about what I would do if it tried to force me off the road or block me. My mind ran through every scenario, each more terrifying than the last. At one point, I saw lights in the distance. Faint, flickering, but they were not road lights. They were irregular, scattered, as if someone had hung lamps or fires in random spots. I tried to head toward them, hoping for a town or even a farmhouse, but as I approached, the lights disappeared, leaving only the black road ahead. I had no idea whether I had imagined them or whether someone had deliberately tried to confuse me. My stomach twisted. I realized I had been on the road so long that I had lost track of time. Could have been midnight or 3 in the morning. The darkness and isolation made everything feel distorted, surreal. Then, finally, I saw a sign. A weathered wooden board illuminated by my headlights. It said, simply, "Rest stop, 5 miles." Relief flooded me. I hadn't realized how desperate I had become for some sign of safety, any sign. I drove faster, the tires humming over the uneven asphalt, until the road finally widened slightly, and I saw the rest area. It was old and mostly abandoned, with overgrown grass and cracked pavement. But it was there. It was real. I parked and stepped out, feeling the cold air hit my face, the quiet that wasn't completely oppressive but still heavy with isolation. I checked around, noting the faint outlines of old picnic tables and a water fountain that didn't work. I didn't see the car that had been following me. I didn't dare look for it. I just kept walking around, making sure I was not being watched, and eventually the tension eased slightly. I decided to sleep in the car using the blankets I had packed. I kept one eye on the rearview mirror, and the doors locked, but exhaustion finally claimed me. When I woke, the sun had begun to rise, painting the trees in soft golden light. I felt a strange sense of calm, a kind of disbelief that I had survived the night. I checked the road behind the rest area and saw no sign of the car. I started the engine and continued driving, taking every caution. I stuck to wider roads, avoided unmarked side roads, and kept my speed moderate. The memory of the previous night's tension stayed with me, but as the miles passed, the fear began to fade, replaced by a cautious appreciation for the ordinary. By mid-afternoon, I reached a small town. The streets were quiet but inhabited, with small shops and people going about daily routines. I stopped at a gas station, filled up, and finally got a cell signal. Calls went through, messages sent. I felt relief, a tangible release of the tension that had bound me all night. I drove further, sticking to well-traveled highways, the rhythm of the car and the passing landscape becoming normal again. By evening, I was near my intended destination, a small lakeside cabin where I could finally rest. I learned something essential on that road trip. Isolation, darkness, and uncertainty could twist ordinary events into fear. The human mind amplifies the unknown into shapes and possibilities that may never exist. The experience left me shaken, but also profoundly aware of the value of caution, preparation, and staying calm under pressure. That night, in the cabin, I unpacked slowly, arranged my belongings, and allowed myself to breathe freely. The journey had been terrifying, yes, but I had survived it, unhurt and wiser. I knew that even if darkness and uncertainty returned, I could face them with careful attention, patience, and resilience.